1v1 me bro is something heard in video games since online multiplayer was created. When you've got two people who think they're the best at something, sometimes the only way to settle it is to go head to head. When two undefeated fighters do this in MMA, it makes for some of the most anticipated and exciting matchups ever because, as impossible as it might seem, someone is about to take an L and lose the precious undefeated O. As fans, we absolutely love fights like this, so why don't we talk about a bunch more? I'm Balian from MMA On Point. Thank you to the channel members who support us, always got to give them a shout out. And these are the 10 most hyped undefeated prospect fights of all time. And just so we're clear guys, we're talking about non-title fights only today. So, who remembers this one? Number 10, Paul Craig versus Tyson Pedro, 9-0 versus 5-0. Now here's two guys right here who both got their UFC careers off to a fantastic start. They immediately got fans' attention right from their first performance. Not only did Paul Craig show up painted in woad like Braveheart, the Scottish Conor McGregor, or whatever Dana wanted him to be, he brought a record with 9 wins, all by finish to back it up.
Paul Craig is the new champion in emphatic fashion.
And he smashed his debut, getting a submission off your back as a light heavyweight. We rarely see that, and it got him a performance of the night. Fans who tuned in to see a Paige Van Zandt fight night also left excited by Craig at the top of the Fox Sports 1 broadcast. Tyson, on the other hand, also got to show exactly what he's all about in his debut. He somehow managed to get Dana White's number and a short notice fight on a UFC Australia card, and he pretty much stole the entire show. After 8 straight decisions in front of a home crowd, Pedro came out and finished Khalil Roundtree in the first round. Fucking deafening, isn't it? He also got performance of the night and tons of immediate attention and fan support. Plus, look at those sick tattoos he had, come on. These two were then booked against each other on a UFC pay-per-view. John Anik described it as 2 jolts of electricity into the division. Considering though how it again ended in the first round after Tyson put Paul in a horrifying crucifix with tons of elbows, you would think it might be a little bit higher up this list, but it was still just 2 guys on the come up. What a great matchup it was though, and really great for the light heavyweight division. Like, we need more of that, my god. Number 9, Hayato Sakurai versus Frank Trigg, 16-0-2 versus 7-0. What were you doing in the year 2000? I think I was on a field trip to the Millennium Dome. Well, if you were lucky enough to have been a hardcore MMA fan, you would have had your eyes on Shuto's massive end-of-year show where 2 of the greatest welterweights outside the UFC were about to put on a great fight. Despite not being in the UFC, everyone still looked at Sakurai as one of the most lethal men on the planet, having gone 16-0, submitting or KOing pretty much everyone. Obviously, at that point, to really cement yourself as one of the best in the world, you need a worthy opponent, and Shuto called in the 7-0 Frank Trigg. He had valuable skills he picked up before fighting, like Olympic trials level wrestling and ADCC championship experience. More than that, he was a physical specimen and had also proven to be a violent finisher. He had already become a huge prospect, clocking in wins in Pride, Shuto, and finishing every fight he had at this point.
Frank Trigg!
Globally though, a win for either man here would be massive, and the winner would in fact go on to fight for the UFC belt. It was a big fight for Shuto. Frank was able to land early, but then he started getting dropped over and over again. And it ended quite brutally. Despite the loss though, Frank and of course Sakurai would go on to challenge for the UFC title anyway and were both beaten by Matt Hughes. Still, their fight as undefeated prospects won itself Shuto Fight of the Year and totally lived up to the hype. Number 8, Mark Diakiese versus Klose, 12-0 versus 7-0. Not many fighters do things so cool that they get their own moves created in the UFC video game, but Mark Diakiese seemed to be the first guy to throw a 2-touch kick, and then he knocked out Teemu Packalin in 30 seconds at home in London, and before you knew it, he was 12-0 and now in the UFC 3 demo when you downloaded it, and so was that new kick as well. Hyped to all hell, and on the back of a 3-fight UFC win streak, they matched him up with Klose. Why were fans so excited about this? Well, Drakkar was another guy, kind of like Frank Trigg, only 7-0, so not as experienced, but fans knew he was a prospect to watch, being from the MMA Lab, a gym that's produced champions. He also attracted fan attention because he was just a super intense dude, the kind of guy who won a wrestling state championship in high school but then got kicked out of college and had a chip on his shoulder for the rest of his MMA career. And that attitude was going up against the confidence of Mark Diakiese, and it really sold it to the fans.
You want to hear something, don't you? I do. Simple as that, I'm the best.
The dudes that he's fought, I think they were scared of him.
I'm a different breed. I'm from Michigan, born and raised out there, and he's not going to scare me.
We knew it was going to be a great fight. Mark was right. Someone's had to go. Ricardo really made a name for himself that night. He took it to Mark, pushed a high pace, and mixed it up constantly, eventually taking the O from his fellow undefeated prospect and also fulfilling some weird EA Sports video game curse in the process, probably. Number 7, Neiman Gracie versus Ed Ruth. 8-0 versus 6-0. Alright, you gotta hand it to Bellator for this one. It was a pretty cool matchup for a number of reasons. Firstly, both Neiman Gracie and Ed Ruth were essentially homegrown Bellator stars. They trained at the Bellator Academy and passed every test along the way, going undefeated against other Bellator prospects. Neiman Gracie was not only the great-grandson of the founder of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but he'd basically medaled in every grappling competition out there. And that was going up against Ed Ruth, an incredibly decorated American folk-style wrestler. We're talking about a 3-time Division I champ, folks. And people were just going to tune in to see if a Gracie could pull off another submission again, like Neiman had in every fight so far. 2 big-time Bellator prospects now finally about to be tested against each other. Take it away, Big John.
And as that old saying says, you know what? Someone's has got to go.
And we did get to see some cool grappling exchanges like we all hoped.
Ruth continues to scramble even though Gracie desperately just wants to secure.
And it also ended in traditional Gracie fashion.
Oh, there it is! There it is! And Ruth taps Neiman Gracie! Wins again via submission! He has a chance now to fight for the Bellator welterweight title. Incredible!
2 other Bellator champions who met as undefeated fighters on their way to the title, though, Yaroslav Amosov and Logan Storley. At 24-0, Amosov had looked insanely dominant in Bellator, also a 4-time World Combat Sambo champion. But Bellator were ready to pull the trigger on another prospect who'd consistently beaten every man in front of him, the 11-0 Logan Storley. They were the co-main event on CBS. It was a back-and-forth fight, and we got some dramatic submission attempts from the grapplers.
That's in tight. That's in tight. He finished it right here, right now. It's going to be over. Oh, he got the leg free. Nice job by Logan Storley. Can he get it? That's in tight. You see Amosov starting to turn. Nicely done.
Despite nearly getting the finish in round 3, Storley lost the decision. They'd run it back for the title a few years later, and it was the same result. Still, Gracie, I think, gets the nod in this list just for being a freaking undefeated Gracie. Number 6, Cody Garbrandt versus Thomas Almeida. 8-0 versus 21-0. Right at the peak of what felt like a new surge of bantamweight contenders, the UFC booked 2 of the most entertaining prospects in the whole promotion. Fans and media had been glued to every single performance Thomas Almeida had put on in the UFC. In 4 fights, he'd gotten 4 performance bonuses and 3 knockouts. In fact, at 21-0, he only had 1 decision. This guy looked like a future champion, make no mistake. But so did Cody Garbrandt. When you come out of a well-established gym like Team Alpha Male, media and hardcore fans are definitely likely to pay attention quickly. And then when you have the elite boxing skills Cody also seemed to have, it's no wonder he speed ran the division as well. How can you not get on board with a guy who knocks people out at 135 pounds? So it's safe to say when this was booked for its own fight night in Vegas, the whole idea of the evening was someone's has to go. And then shit talk between both guys only added to the hype for this one.
And if I can go in the deep waters and take myself there, he's not going to be able to swim with me. He's going to be sink.
Almeida told Brazilian press he was going to KO Cody in the 2nd round.
He started the shit talking first. Once I hit him once, he's going to try to turn into a brawl.
Honestly, I wish this fight went a bit longer than it did, but Cody looked unstoppable and knocked out Almeida in 3 minutes. Phenomenal performance that propelled him to a title fight just 6 months later. Lots of anticipation for this one between 2 guys that looked like either one was definitely going to be a champion. Number 5, Ilia Topuria versus Bryce Mitchell, 12-0 versus 15-0. The words, "I'm a real novelty, straight out of poverty," spoken by Thug Nasty himself on title track Dark and Sore, pretty much hit the nail on the head as to why we were all so invested in him by the time he strapped up his new camo shorts and mauled Edson Barbosa for 3 rounds on a pay-per-view. He is one unpredictable guy inside and outside the cage, but after that win at 15-0, he was also seriously getting close to a title fight. He even started saying things like, "Put me in there with Volk, I'll beat him right now." At the same time though, new guy in the division and future champ Ilia Topuria had just knocked out 3 dudes in a row, and in ruthless fashion. He was on a title campaign and targeted Bryce.
He wants to go on Twitter and post a picture of his abs, his little perfect 8-pack or whatever. I've been eating peanut butter cookies for like 3 weeks now, and I'll still get off my couch and whoop your ass.
It sounded like a good idea to the UFC, so they put it on the main card of Blachowicz versus Ankalaev. And even on the UFC promo video, people were commenting that the 2 undefeated prospects, Ilia vs Bryce, was the only fight to care about.
Ilia said, "I'm a coward. Does a coward show up prepared to die? I've already proved him wrong, and I'll prove him wrong again on Saturday.
Holy shit, dude. Basically, by the time the door shut, we were ready to see this one, and once again, Topuria picked up another impressive finish that blew the roof off. Some had said whoever wins this one was gonna be the champ, and I guess they were right. Number 4, Bisping versus Matt Hamill. 13-0 versus 3-0. After 2 cracking seasons of The Ultimate Fighter, Season 3 had a great rivalry with Tito and Ken Shamrock, but also some new top prospects. But it pretty quickly became clear Ortiz had found a bit of a prodigy in wrestler Matt Hamill.
I think that Tito puts a lot of hopes into Matt, and I think that, Matt closely resembles the person that Tito is, and I think that Tito's looking to build another Tito Ortiz.
But also on Tito's team was Michael Bisping, who clearly felt that Tito was just playing favourites.
It's pretty clear to see Tito's favourite is Matt. It's getting me down a little, I've flown halfway across the world to come to this thing. I expect to get the same treatment as everybody else.
Now this of course created a rivalry that kind of lasted all season, between the two of them having to also train together. Based on their abilities and performances, it looked like both guys would be the final matchup, but an injury forced Matt Hamill to pull out, so we never got to see it. Fast forward 1 year though, and both guys have UFC contracts and are undefeated, and definitely it was a fight that everyone felt like we totally missed out on and needed to happen. To make things even more anticipated, the UFC booked it for London and the co-main event of the UFC and Pride title unification fight between Rampage and Dan Henderson. Unfortunately though, the fight itself wasn't really anything special and is now way more famous for how extremely controversial the decision was. They gave it to Bisping and everyone disagreed. He'd go on to fight Rashad Evans, who was also another undefeated prospect, but that fight was nowhere near as hyped as this one, especially after this performance from Bisping and I guess a string of decisions from Rashad at the time. Number 3, Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Ian Garry, 18-0 versus 15-0. Since Kamaru Usman was unseated in a Rocky-like performance from Leon Edwards, it's felt like the welterweight division has opened itself up to a whole new world. The 170 division was suddenly bursting at the seams with top prospects, and it felt like it was only a matter of time before they started to cross paths. Many people's new favourite fighter, Shavkat Rakhmonov, was among them. It was kind of impossible to ignore his UFC run, kept adding to his finishing streak until it reached 18. With such a well-rounded game and so many dominant performances, fans just couldn't wait to see him fight for the title, and in fact he got his shot at the champ Bilal, but that's where plans changed. Another new guy in the division though was Ian Garry, who in just 3 years silenced a lot of critics by picking up 8 straight wins in the UFC, making it 15-0 for Ian. But what made any Ian fight more hype than a normal fighter was the confidence in the predictions of his own abilities, which led directly into a lot of fan dislike and comparisons to Conor McGregor, who he was directly quoting at times. Some fans wanted to see how skilled he was, others just wanted to see him lose. Either way, when Bilal couldn't defend his title, fans were absolutely buzzing when Garry jumped in instead.
The UFC called us 15 minutes ago. Will you fight Shavkat December 7th? I am going to say yes.
Now, it wasn't a title fight, but arguably, this is going to be better. Both guys have looked so dominant, and like a new breed of fighter, it's honestly difficult to know who is going to lose. Either way, it's one of the most highly anticipated matches of the year. Number 2, Randy Couture versus Vitor Belfort, 2-0 versus 4-0. Got to jump into the DeLorean for this one and time travel back to 1997 and try to immerse yourself in the fandom of the late 90s and just how much people were freaking out about certain new breeds of fighter back then. Sure, the Gracies had proved that being small didn't mean as much as a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but then in 96, Vitor Belfort showed up looking jacked as a young Mike Tyson, barely 20 years old and with the same Jiu-Jitsu background as these Gracies. Everyone thought, well, this is what the future of the sport looks like. He was the phenom, and then he stopped 3 opponents in a row, making him a clear championship challenger. Now, while this new young predator had arrived, a guy like Randy Couture was his complete opposite, really. He wasn't super jacked, he wasn't super young, but he'd show the kind of mentality and intelligence that you'd rarely see in the sport. And so, at just 2-0, a matchup between him and Vitor Belfort for the #1 contender fight was incredibly anticipated by the fan base. Neither guy had shown any real weaknesses, and the winner was going to be one of the best fighters on the planet. The world of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu had every bit of faith in Vitor Belfort as he walked to the cage, but he ran right into a brick wall in Randy Couture, who toughed out the early minutes to finish Vitor.
He reacted exactly how we felt he was going to react. The longer the fight went, the better it was going to be for me. He was going to be exhausted. Our strategy was right on.
People had expected this kid to maybe be undefeated for the rest of time. That's how much he'd been hyped. But Randy was just starting a career of proving people wrong. Number 1, Lyoto Machida versus Thiago Silva, 13-0 versus 13-0. Of all these undefeated win streaks and moments of invincibility that surrounded fighters, I don't think you'd find one stronger than the aura of the O that hung next to the dragon Lyoto Machida's name. He would barely get touched in some of his early UFC fights, always called a puzzle that couldn't be solved. I mean, he was literally being promoted straight out of a movie. He crossed paths with other undefeated prospects like Rich Franklin when he was also undefeated, and Machida had just been 2-0 when he beat him. And from there, and with these kind of performances, he sort of garnered some mythical status amongst the fans, and they wanted to see if he could win the title. But to be fair, another guy with an equally scary aura around him at the time was the no-nonsense light heavyweight Muay Thai monster Thiago Silva. This guy had totally captured fans' attention by knocking out 4 straight UFC opponents in a row, including a brutal finish of the slugger Houston Alexander, all while being an incredibly intimidating undefeated 13-0 fighter, and the UFC lined him and Lyoto up for a title eliminator. It was even made the co-main event of one of the biggest pay-per-views ever in the first champ-champ fight between GSP and BJ Penn. To make things even more anticipated, Thiago was talking a bit of shit, saying Lyoto's style involved more running than fighting, and he was going to knock him out in the first round like he had done with so many other opponents. Of course, the Dragon doesn't really do trash talk and delivered instead another flawless performance. Silva barely landed a glove while Lyoto knocked him out in the last second of the first round. At the time, the hype around Machida had been at an all-time high, and with a guaranteed title shot on the line, the co-main event, every fan now wanted to see how the Machida era would play out. Alright then, hope you enjoyed that one. Always fun talking about undefeated fighters, especially when they have to fight other undefeated fighters. Thank you to Max Randall. He edited this video, so if you enjoyed it, go check him out on social media, or you can check out his JITS YouTube channel, The Combat Arcade. Thank you to the Hall of Famers who support this video and every single video, guys. We appreciate you. If you want to find out what being a Hall of Famer is all about, you can click the button down below. Give us a like if you enjoyed the video as well. We always appreciate that. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. We do so many videos every single week now. You can't miss them. They're coming at you. You gotta subscribe, man. I'll see you in the next one.